Sunday, October 15th, 2023. We're here for a very special edition of the African History Network show, and I'm here with a returning guest. You've seen them numerous times here on the African History Network show, going back to when I first launched the show in 2010. We are joined by none other than Abayomi Azikiwe, editor of the Pan-African Newswire. Hotep, brother, how you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
Hey, I'm all right, man. It's always good to talk to you, Abayomi. We go all the way back to Wayne State University in the early 1990s.
Almost 30 years ago.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. You still look like you did back then.
Thanks for the compliment. I know I don't, but thanks anyway.
Well, look, I wanted to have this conversation today, everybody. We're going to discuss the Israel-Hamas war, humanitarian crisis, deadly Middle East conflict. This has exploded since last week, Saturday, October 7th. It has dominated cable news. It has dominated headlines. You've seen me share information, especially from Al Jazeera English, who has some of the best coverage next to the Pan-African Newswire, because I've been reading some of Abayomi's information as well, some of his articles from the Pan-African Newswire. Okay, so we're going to get into this and get into a history lesson as well. Now, Abayomi Azikiwe is the editor of the Pan-African Newswire, which is an electronic press agency that was founded in 1998. He has worked for decades in solidarity with the liberation movements and progressive governments of the African continent and the Caribbean. Abayomi is a graduate of Wayne State University, my alma mater in Detroit, Michigan, where he earned an undergraduate and graduate degree in political science, public administration, and educational and administrative studies. He has spoken on numerous news platforms as well, international platforms. They are numerous, too numerous to name. So I wanted to do a brief overview of where we are here. So far we know that the Hamas attacks, and we know Hamas is a terrorist organization, but we have to make a distinction between Hamas and the 2.2 million Palestinians. Okay, the Hamas attacks have killed at least 1,300 people in Israel, actually close to 1,400, a little more than 1,400 now, and injured over 3,842 Israelis, authorities said. Now, when we look at Palestinians, Palestinian officials said 2,670 people in Gaza have been killed so far since October 7th, and 9,600 have been wounded. Daniel Hagari, a spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces, said on Sunday, October 15th, that about 600,000 people had evacuated south and that others should follow. The Israeli military said it is preparing a wide range of offensive plans, quote, for the next stages of the war, with an emphasis on significant ground operations, end quote, though it has not provided a concrete indication of when the assault would start. Now, the United States is working with the governments of Israel, Egypt, and Jordan, as well as with the United Nations, quote, to surge support to ease the humanitarian consequences of Hamas's attack, create conditions needed to resume the flow of assistance, and advocate for the upholding of the law of war, end quote, President Joe Biden said on Saturday, October 14th. Now, the World Health Organization said Israel's directive to evacuate hospitals in northern Gaza was a quote unquote death sentence for the sick and injured, end quote, and called on the country to reverse it. We know that the United Nations has also said the call for the call that Israel put out for 1.1 million Palestinians to flee Gaza and head south. They said that was impossible as well. Now, the Palestine Red Crescent Society has said it will continue to operate Al-Quds QUDS hospital and Gaza's emergency medical center. Diplomats struggle to ease an escalating humanitarian crisis in Gaza and get foreigners out of the blockaded enclave as intensifying clashes along Israel's border with Lebanon and Israeli airstrikes inside Syria stoke fears of a wider conflict in the region. So, Abayomi, I want to turn it over to you. Tell us what's your analysis of what has transpired since October 7th, when the terrorist organization Hamas attacks Israel? We know there were about 256 or so people killed. We know there are about 156 Israelis that were taken hostage. And also the updated number is that 30 Americans were killed as well. So what's your analysis so far?
Well, first of all, I do not describe Hamas and its affiliates as terrorist organizations. They are liberation movements and political party. Hamas was elected by the people of the Gaza Strip to take political control of that region.
In 2006, right?
Palestine.
2006, right?
Yes.
January
we talk
2006.
About Palestine, we're not just talking about the Gaza Strip. We're not talking about the West Bank, East Jerusalem. We're talking about the whole area from the river to the sea, which has been claimed by the Zionist state of Israel. And they had the cooperation of Britain and the United States to gain recognition within the United Nations in 1948. The United States today is a major financial, military, technological, political, and diplomatic supporter of the state of Israel.
Right.
The state of Israel is an extension of United States imperialism in West Asia and North Africa. So we have to be clear that Hamas is no more of a terrorist organization than the African National Congress was, or that any other liberation movement, whether it's Frelimo in Mozambique, MPLA in Angola, they're not terrorist organizations. These are organizations that are fighting for their national liberation, for statehood, and for sovereignty. Now, they want to frame them as a terrorist organization to delegitimize their struggle, to say that only the Zionists, people who subscribe to Zionism as an ideology, have a right to control Palestine. This is totally false. They said the same thing about South Africa, that the Boers, the so-called Afrikaners, were the legitimate owners of that part of Southern Africa. It's absurd. I mean, just think about it. You know, most of the people who run the state of Israel now, their ancestry is in Western Europe and some in Eastern Europe. A lot of them are from Germany. They can trace their heritage back to Germany, Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, and so forth. Traditionally, there was a Jewish community in that part of the world, and also in Africa as well. So this is what people need to understand. The original Jews, it's highly likely that they were African people,
right?
You know, from ancient Egypt, Ethiopia. There's people who
like Colossus,
and
from Israel.
Exactly. So all these lines were drawn by the imperialist states. Even the whole concept of Palestine, for example, which described Israel prior to 1948. Go back and read the historical literature on that part of the world. It was not called Israel. It was called Palestine. All right.
Right.
So these are labels, these are names. And just to point out that there are Jewish people in Ethiopia, what today is considered Ethiopia, in East Africa. I've even met people from South Africa who say that their ethnic orientation also includes an adherence to what they consider to be Judaism. So these are very important to clarify these issues, because if you listen to certain people, they'll tell you that only the so-called Ashkenazis or Jewish people who have their origins in Europe are the real adherents to Judaism. That is not true. It's not true at all. A lot of Jewish people will tell you that they migrated into Europe, they intermarried with people from Northern Europe and Western Europe, and that's why they look the way they do today. So what has been happening is that since 1948, the state of Israel was recognized by the United Nations. At that time, the United Nations was pretty much an all-white organization. They had Liberia was a member, Ethiopia was a member, Haiti. But outside of that, there were no other African nations. Turkey was there. They voted against recognition. And there was also some Arab states that were there as well. So we have to be clear. These people have no legitimate historical claim to that part of the world. They try to trace back their claim to the Bible, to the Torah, but all these things are open to interpretation.
Right.
The Bible that's read today, for example, the King James Version of the Bible was published during the mid-17th century, during the 1650s. Give me a break. Christianity goes back at least a millennium and a half before that. The original Christian church, organized Christian church, was in Egypt. The so-called Coptics, who have their own language, and Saint Mark is considered the founder of the first organized Christian church. It did not start in Europe. It started on the African continent. And even today, you have the Orthodox Christians, and you have the Christians who follow Rome. And out of the Roman church, there are numerous splits. We have the Anabaptists, the Methodists, the Anglicans, so on and so forth. So, in terms of history, we have to emphasize the African origins of Christianity, the African origins of Judaism. And this is very, very important in understanding what is going on today. So the Hamas organization developed during the 1980s, and their objective is essentially the same objective as the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was started before during the 1960s, early mid-1960s. They want to liberate Palestine for the people of that country. They want to overturn Zionism, which is a racist ideology and political system that is rooted in Western imperialism. Read the literature of the founders of the World Zionist Movement, people like Theodore Herzl, for example, who was a journalist and an educator. Chaim Weizmann, who was a chemist, who was heavily involved in World War I and developing explosives. Go back and read their writings from the 1890s up until the early decades of the 20th century. They talk about forming a Jewish state in order to uphold Western civilization and Western imperialism outside of the West. Because you see, Palestine was not the only proposal they had for the formation of the state of Israel.
Correct.
Remember they wanted to set it up in Libya?
Or Uganda. They looked at Uganda
exactly.
Also. Right.
Yeah.
In Central Africa. Yep. They looked at Uganda as well.
Deep into the continent. And also Madagascar, which is today off the coast of Southern Africa in what they call the Indian Ocean. I don't know why they don't call it the African Ocean. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion.
Right, exactly. And let me just say this. Let me just say this quickly. I'm gonna let you continue. So when we talk about this history, now this is, let me speak for the African History Network, and then I'll let you speak for yourself. This is not anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. We're just talking about history.
Exactly.
Okay. This is not trying to dehumanize anybody. This is not saying one group of people doesn't have a right to live. This is not what we're saying. We're talking about history. Okay, so I want people to be very clear on this.
And there are African people who are Semitic people who speak Semitic languages. So how can we be anti-Semitic? How can we be anti-Jewish when we can trace back the origins of the Judaic religion, the Christian Judaic tradition, to the African continent?
Right. Exactly. So this is not trying to attack another group or anything like that. And one of the things that I noticed, one of the things I was critical of early on, and I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, October 13th, because I'm a panelist every Friday providing historical analysis and political analysis. One of the things that I talked about, and I want you to continue and comment on this, is that early on, the first, so Saturday, October 7th, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the dominant narrative in especially cable news, MSNBC, but also Washington Post, NBC News, New York Times, was to focus on the killing of Israelis.
Exactly.
And to a much lesser extent, that they talk about the Palestinians who were being killed. And who have been killed, even if we just look at from 2008 to 2020, is about 5,500 Palestinians who've been killed compared to something like 500 Israelis. But around Wednesday, as the number of Palestinians being killed started to surpass the number of Israelis who have been killed since October 7th, because Israel has been firing hundreds of rockets into the Gaza Strip. Now it's something more than 2,400 Palestinians will be killed compared to about 1,400 Israelis just in this past, since October 7th. Now you start seeing a narrative shifting some. They've had to modulate and start talking about the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, the deaths of Palestinians, and things like that. So I have seen this shift. It's not as much as I think should happen, but I have seen a change. Go ahead and comment on that and continue your comments.
Yes. Anytime oppressed people take up arms to fight for their liberation, the oppressors label them as terrorists. I've heard comments from Israeli officials referring to Palestinians as animals. This is to dehumanize the oppressed. This is to delegitimize the struggle of the oppressed people, to say that they're less than the oppressors and therefore they don't have the same equal rights. Israel is a Jewish state. It's primarily a European Jewish state. They have special roads, supermarkets, housing districts exclusively for Palestinians. Israelis have special favors and status within Israeli society. You have to look at the context under which the initial attack occurred.
Right.
They were having a festival,
music festival,
in southern Israel, right on the border with Gaza, where people are living in squalor. To have people who are living high on the hog and you don't have anything in your own country. That is right there something that could spark violence against the oppressors. And this has been going on for many, many years. It just didn't start on October the 7th. It's been going on for decades. In fact, there were massacres against the Palestinian people leading up to the declaration of the independence of Israel in May of 1948. There were forced removals of Palestinian people from their homes in the hundreds of thousands. And this was all sanctioned by the United Nations, and it was sanctioned largely by the United States government and the British government.
Right.
So these are important points to bring up, and it has nothing to do with saying that somehow European Jewish people have some special proclivity towards hatred and oppression. In fact, the Zionist movement, when it first started in the 1890s and the early part of the 20th century, was a minority movement. The majority of Jews in Europe in particular did not support it. This changed radically as the decades moved on, particularly after 1948. So today, what the Zionist ideologues and politicians try to advance is that if you oppose the state of Israel and its policies, it means that you're against the Jewish people. This is a convoluted effort
Right.
to build support, not only externally, but also internally within the Jewish community. In fact, some of the most harsh criticism and treatment against people who oppose Zionism are done by those within the Jewish community who have raised questions and who actually oppose the system that they have there now. So they attack each other. And you've seen it in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
There have been huge demonstrations in Israel, in Tel Aviv and other cities against the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's divided Israeli society. Now, that division on the surface has nothing to do with the Palestinian question.
Okay.
Yet, it has weakened the capacity of the Israeli government under Netanyahu to even respond to the attacks that occurred on October 7th. They were taken completely off guard doing that because they're so busy fighting themselves that they have lost the capacity to even defend their. And there have been testimony over the BBC and other networks saying by Israeli citizens that they had no assistance from the Israeli Defense Forces on beginning on October 7th, the Israeli police and other security agencies when all this was going on. They were left totally defenseless, despite the fact that our tax dollars, to the tune of billions every year, are sent to the state of Israel for weapons, for intelligence mechanisms.
It's close to $5 billion a year. It's close as between $4 to $5 billion a year.
Of U.S. aid.
Mm-hmm.
The largest recipient of U.S. aid in.
Yep. Okay, I was freezing up for a minute. Yes, largest recipient of U.S. aid. Yeah. Yep. Israel. That's the #1 country. Okay. For those of you just joining, we're speaking with Abayomi Azikiwe, editor of the Pan-African Newswire. I've known Abayomi over 30 years. Met him when I was an undergrad at Wayne State University in the early 1990s. He's a brilliant brother, and we've had him numerous times here on the African History Network show, going back to when I first launched the show in 2010. And I've been following numerous news sources, Abayomi, including Al Jazeera English. But I saw this article from Times of Israel, and it hits on what you were talking about because Benjamin Netanyahu is getting a lot of criticism within Israel from his own people. Now, this article here, this is an op-ed from the Times of Israel by Tal Schneider, October 8th, 2023. So this is the day after the attack. The name of this article, for years, F-O-R, for years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. The premier's policy of treating the terror group as a partner at the expense of Abbas and Palestinian statehood has resulted in wounds that will take Israel years to heal from. Now talk about this and talk some about this criticism that Netanyahu is getting from within Israel, blaming him for the attack, or what's transpired.
Well, in the early years of Hamas, during the late 1980s, they did for a few years try to use them against the PLO.
Use Hamas. Israel tried to use Hamas against the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Yeah, in order to divide the Palestinian movement. But it was a horrendous mistake on the part of the Israelis because Hamas grew rapidly, and they took a hardline position that the state of Israel had no legitimacy, it had no right to exist, and that Palestine belonged exclusively to the Palestinians. Now Hamas is considered the principal enemy of the state of Israel. So it's a contradiction, but the criticism really is centered on the fact that the defense and the intelligence apparatus of the state of Israel has gone into decline. It's obvious based on what has happened since October 7th because of the internal problems that are taking place inside the state of Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been convicted of crimes
Right.
by the Israeli courts, but he's never been sent to prison.
Right.
He's been convicted of immoral activity. We don't have to go into detail, but these are allegations against him. Yet they cannot get rid of him,
right?
Because the United States, whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, unconditionally supports Israel. And why do they do that? Because Israel is the key component of U.S. foreign policy and dominance in West Asia and in North Africa.
Right.
That is the real reason behind it. And they come up with all these stories about how Jews are special. They have they're blessed. They are the chosen people of God. All these type of myths that are open to interpretation, even from a religious perspective. What religion allows for one group to dominate another group?
Correct.
One group to deny the humanity of another group.
Right.
That's not the type of religion that most people would subscribe to.
Right.
So now, since these myths are collapsing, they're viewing Israel, at least in the public propaganda and psychological warfare that is advanced by all these cable news networks and media outlets, is that they are a democracy. Well, how can you be a democracy when you're denying basic political and civil rights to the majority of the people in the population? People who have been forced from their homes and are not being allowed to come back. You have Israelis who have dual citizenship. They serve, you have people who are born in the United States. They can go to Israel, get land, get a home, get jobs at the expense of the Palestinians. And they also have Israeli citizenship and United States citizenship. They could even fight in the Israeli Defense Forces.
Right.
Now, can you imagine if you have a Palestinian, even if he's a U.S. citizen and has a U.S. passport, if he said, well, I'm going to go home and fight with the Al-Qassam brigades, which is the military wing of Hamas, he'd be arrested, if not killed. So this is the type of discrimination that has been fostered for many years by the United States and their proxy, the State of Israel.
Yeah, let me look at a little bit here of this article. And Benjamin Netanyahu also reminds me of Donald Trump, who's running for president again to stay out of prison. For years,
he's a staunch supporter of Israel as well.
What'd you say?
Yeah, he's a staunch supporter of Israel as well. Trump is a staunch supporter of Israel. And somebody posted about the Islamic Palestinians. They're also Palestinian Christians. So even though the majority of Palestinians are Islamic, there are adherents to Christianity among the Palestinians, just like in Egypt, for example.
Yeah.
You have Muslims and you also have Egyptian Christians, and also Egyptian Jews exist as well, just like there are African Jews.
Right.
So, I don't think it's per se a religious struggle, although there is an emphasis on the part of Hamas in regard to Islam. But I believe that the basis of the conflict is between the Palestinians who are oppressed and the Zionists who are the oppressors. That is the main contradiction. I don't think it's a religious contradiction, because historically these people lived together. Jews, Christians, and Muslims had lived together for centuries. So they politicized religion and racialized religion in an effort to dominate that part of the world.
And let me just say this also: when we talk about Christianity, Judaism, or Hebrewism, and Islam, when we talk about them as religions, they are not specific to a particular race. What I mean by that is people of different races can adopt that religion. Okay. You have Chinese Muslims, you have African Muslims, you have white people who are Muslims as well. Okay. When Malcolm X went on his Hajj to Mecca in 1963, late April, May 1963, he talked about seeing blonde hair, blue-eyed Muslims in Mecca. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now he did go to Mecca in 1959. Probably saw the same thing. But he just didn't talk about it then. So
Yeah, he was under the Nation of Islam at
right,
that
he was
time.
in
Yeah,
the
he did.
nation then.
It's important to point out
Right.
that he went to several countries in West Asia. He also went to Egypt, Sudan, and Ghana in 1959 as an emissary of Elijah Muhammad. But it was in '64, after he broke with the Nation of Islam, that he accepted Orthodox Islam as his religious outlook. But he was very clear that his objective was to liberate Black people.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. He officially
despite any religious affiliation.
He officially separated from the Nation of Islam. I think it was March 8th, 1964. Yeah, March 8th, 64. Yeah. And then we know March 26th, 1964, he meets Dr. King for the first and only time at the U.S. Senate debate for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then
during that debate. Yeah, during that debate.
Right, exactly. They met for a couple minutes. And when Malcolm met Dr. King, he told Dr. King, and there's an article from the Washington Post that deals with this. He told Dr. King that he was throwing all of his effort into the heart of the civil rights movement, because Malcolm, even though he created the Organization of Afro-American Unity, when he leads the Nation of Islam, Malcolm joins the civil rights movement. Okay. And he in March 29th, 3 days after he meets Dr. King, March 29th, 1964, he delivers the Ballad of the Bullet at Washington Heights, New York. And he delivered March 29th, 1964, April 3rd, 64 in Cleveland, Ohio, Corey Methodist Church, and then April 4th, 1964, here in Detroit, King Solomon Baptist Church. And in the Ballad of the Bullet, he talks about interjecting Black nationalism into the civil rights movement. Is in the speech. He talks about interjecting Black. That's one of the themes. Yeah, that's one of the themes of the speech. He's talking about interjecting Black nationalism into the civil rights movement, radicalizing Black nationalism, but he radicalizing the civil rights movement. But he also talks about registering African Americans to vote as independents. He talks about that in the speech as well. People think
the Freedom Now Party. The Freedom Now Party was in the effort to build an independent Black-led party, and it was quite successful here in Michigan. But they changed the rules after the 1964 election, so they couldn't get ballot status. But that's a whole nother discussion. So
exactly. But I just wanted to we start talking about Malcolm, so we start talking about that. But there's a history of African American leaders supporting the Palestinians as well.
Yes, Malcolm X.
Malcolm X, because the Palestinians historically have been oppressed by Israel. Okay, now if we look at this article here briefly from the Times of Israel, the Times of Israel.com. Name of the article: for years, once again, for years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. Okay. So in the article, it says, for years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees, making moves that propped up the Hamas. They refer to Hamas as a terror group. And I want to get your perspective on the attack Hamas initiated October 7th. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. The idea was to prevent Mahmoud Abbas or anyone else in the Palestinian Authority's West Bank government from advancing toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. Thus, amid this bid to impair Mahmoud Abbas, Hamas was upgraded from a mere terror group to an organization with which Israel held indirect negotiations via Egypt, and one that was allowed to receive infusions of cash from abroad. Okay, now Hamas was also included in discussions about increasing the number of work permits granted to Gazan laborers, people who live in Gaza, which kept money flowing into Gaza, meaning food for families and the ability to purchase basic products. Israeli officials said these permits, which allow Gazan laborers to earn higher salaries than they would in the enclave, were a powerful tool to help preserve calm. Okay, so put this in perspective, and then I want to talk also some about the October 7th attack as well.
Yeah, I don't agree with that analysis. As I said before,
go ahead.
They did attempt during the early phase of Hamas as a resistance movement to allow them to grow in an effort to divide the Palestinian movement. And it failed.
When you say they, who is the they you're talking about? The state of Israel.
Successive governments in the state of Israel. But they were not able to influence Hamas to the point where they abandoned their national liberation struggle for the liberation of Palestine. They get support from Qatar. Some people say that the Hamas group came out of their relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and but they do get support from Qatar, which is a oil-rich country. That's where Al Jazeera is based.
Yeah,
but they don't talk about that. They talk about the support that they get, which is mainly military support from the Islamic Republic of Iran. They don't have the same ideology as the dominant group in Iran. But Iran, as a principled state that supports the total liberation of Palestine, or Al-Quds, as they call it, that's why they support Hamas. They also support Islamic Jihad, which is another political party and liberation movement that's heavily based in the Gaza Strip.
Now, when you say they, you're talking about the state of Israel.
No, I'm talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Iranian government.
Oh, okay. Islamic Republic of Iran also supports
Qatar supports Hamas.
Yeah.
And so does Iran. But I'm saying ideologically, the Iranian, they're Shia Muslims.
Yes.
And they tend to be a lot more internationalist in their approach. That's how they've grown over the last 43, 44 years. But Iran supports Hamas based upon the principle that they are fighting for the liberation of Palestine, for the liberation of Jerusalem, for the Muslim holy sites. That is the basis of their support. It's not necessarily an ideological affinity between Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Same situation with Qatar. Qatar is a very wealthy enclave in the Emirates. I mentioned they have Al Jazeera, and they have, in fact, supported Hamas as well. And I think even the conservative Arab regimes. Now, Iran is not an Arab country. It's considered a Persian Gulf country. But they're Islamic, but they're Shia Islamic. They're not of the Sunni variety of Islam. But even countries like Qatar, for example, it makes sense for them to support Hamas and for them to support the Palestinian struggle because they know the current structure that exists there now is unsustainable. We've seen the contradictions just over the last 8 days, that the fact that they could break through the Iron Dome, the Israeli intelligence apparatus, the Israeli Defense Forces, and wreak havoc against the Israeli population and the military. It's not just civilians, so-called civilians, who are really settlers in the state of Israel that have been captured by the Hamas fighters. There's also military personnel and intelligence personnel as well that are being held captive. I don't consider them hostages. They are prisoners of war. This is a war that's being waged against the oppressed nation of the Palestinians, against the state of Israel, which is a settler colonial government that is backed by you and I's tax dollars here in the United States. Now, people can't afford, a lot of people can't afford to put gasoline in their cars right now. They
And
can't
got
afford to put food on the table.
right, because they have a high
No, I'm talking
poverty
about right here
rate,
in
high
Detroit.
unemployment rate, things like that. Now,
Right here in Detroit.
I think when
they can't afford to put gas in their cars.
right, so
Yet they're sending money
go ahead.
to Ukraine. They're sending money to Israel to prop up these regimes.
Right. So I think when they talk about hostages taken, and I think they are referring to them as hostages because, from my understanding, that these were civilians. They weren't like military personnel. Okay.
Some were military personnel.
October 7th, the attack October 7th. Okay. Now, from what we can ascertain that's true, and I want to get your take on this. When you have civilians that are, we may say, prisoners of war, but they're not.
Yes,
they're not in like the military. They're at a music festival, okay, and they're taken by Hamas, taken into Gaza. Okay, now how should we look at those actions? So Hamas, many people refer to Hamas as a liberation organization. Others say they're a terrorist organization. They may have changed how they characterized them over the years when after they couldn't control them. However it is, right? How should we look at people who are civilians? And some people say these were innocent people, or most of them were innocent who were taken. How should we analyze this? How should we look at this?
These people are settlers. Their status and authority derives from the settler colonial regime of the state of Israel. They are prisoners of war. They are captives of war. Some of them are Israeli military personnel who were captured.
Who were at the music festival?
At the festival, they live in those kibbutz, Ashkelon, and other ones, which are in the southern part of what is considered the state of Israel. So yes, they are prisoners of war. And as such, they will be captured, and they can be held as bargaining chips in regard to any future developments with the state of Israel. For example, one Israeli soldier,
right,
a few years ago was traded, for 5,000 Palestinian prisoners.
Yeah, I heard
the
that.
Israelis have
Something
thousands
like that.
of Palestinian and other Arabs in Israeli military jails. They have no due process at all.
Right.
And it's not just what they're doing in Palestine. They have occupied southern Lebanon. They were driven out by Hezbollah in 2000, and then again in 2006 when they tried to come in. The Israelis occupy the Golan Heights in Syria. Yes, they do. That is Syrian territory, and it's occupied by the state of Israel with the endorsement of the United States. See, these are things they don't talk about anymore.
Right.
The 1967 war. You saw the seizure of the Sinai, the Golan Heights in Syria, and also the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
And they also annexed the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which were connected with Egypt and Jordan. So Palestine is not what Israel defines it as being, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It is the entire land. And of course, historically, it's connected with Egypt,
right,
which is in Africa.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
it's right next to Egypt, and
yes.
Yep. And the only thing that really separates Africa from what has been termed as the Middle East is the Suez Canal, if I remember correctly. The Suez Canal, which was completed around 1859, because basically all that was part of Africa also.
It is.
Yeah.
Who drew the lines? Who drew the lines to say that Palestine is not part of North Africa? I mean, give me a break. Where does Africa stop and where does Asia began. West Asia
Right.
began.
And I'm going to
You know, we can go back. We could go back and it's a lot of literature that substantiates the interconnectedness of these peoples.
Right.
Yemen, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are Africans in Yemen that have been there thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
Okay. They didn't come from Ethiopia. They didn't come from Somalia. Yeah, I've met some of them. You know, they say we've always been in Yemen.
Right.
You know, so the Europeans have divided us not only geographically but also in terms of our intellectual thinking. To say that, oh no, what does this have to do with Africa, Palestine? It has a lot to do with Africa,
right?
You know, because it's right there, you know, connected to the Rafah crossing, which they talk about, is considered Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
One side is Egypt, the other side is considered Palestine or Gaza or Israel. So, you know, it's a very complicated situation, but it's very simple if we think in terms of how the imperialists have carved up the world.
Exactly.
Just in terms of Africa too.
Yep.
It's the same situation.
Well,
for example,
okay,
Sudan,
mm-hmm.
just to mention this briefly.
Okay.
The area that's considered Sudan today, for centuries, they had Christian kingdoms for about 6 centuries that resisted the encroachment of Islam. You know, we can document this in history.
Well, that part of that was Nubia. Part of that was Nubia within within the region of Kush, the lower portion of what today is Egypt, the upper portion of Sudan was Nubia. I just interviewed Sister Nubia Wartford on the African History Network show on Thursday, April 12th. You know, so you have to understand history to be able to understand what you're seeing today, especially we're dealing with geopolitics. And your understanding of history is directly related to your understanding of politics. There's another article I want to go to. We're going to wrap up here in a few minutes. But you know, when at least I was a kid, you know, I would watch like Sunday morning before I went to church with my mother. I would watch the Lone Ranger TV show from the like 1950s, the black and white, and then there were 5 seasons. Clayton Moore is the Lone Ranger. The first 4 seasons in black and white, the last season in color. And in the Lone Ranger,
it were reruns. They had to be reruns.
Oh, these were reruns. Yeah, these are reruns. I wasn't born in 71. Yeah, these are reruns. But but the Lone Ranger TV show, it was easy to identify who the good guys were and the bad guys. It was real easy. The good guy, the Lone Ranger wore a white hat. A lot of times the bad guys were black. They were outlaws, things like this, right? They called them outlaws, what have you, okay? Here, when we understand this history, it's not so clear who's the good guy and who's the bad guy if based upon media, based upon how certain acts like October 7th are depicted. Okay. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, I mean, the whole concept of a terrorist, people who are animals, less than human, people who have less of a right to their homeland than other people, it's been heavily racialized. And we can see that in U.S. foreign policy, how Biden responded by denying the humanity of the Palestinians, by sending Antony Blinken, who is a Jewish American person, to
Secretary of State
with the Jewish head of state, Benjamin Netanyahu. That's where he went first. That's the allegiance that he pledged himself to, because Israel, as one former U.S. official described it, is the largest anti-aircraft carrier in the so-called Middle East. And that's why I refrained from using the term Middle East. I use terms like West Asia, North Africa, because these were the terms that were used going back to the early and mid 20th century.
Yeah, it's an ally. Israel is an asset to the U.S. when it comes to surveillance. From my understanding, when it comes to surveillance on other countries there in that region. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if the state of Israel is weakened or collapsed, it will undermine the entire U.S. foreign policy project in West Asia and in North Africa. That's why they're so worried right now, because
That's why they're so worried right now.
Hamas and the Palestinians and Hezbollah could come into this from southern Lebanon, they're Yemen willing to volunteer and go and fight alongside the Palestinians. If they are weakened, and if the state of Israel collapses, it will dismantle the entire foreign policy project of the United States in that part of the world. That's why they're worried at this point, because it exposed their weakness and it exposed the contradictions.
Now,
the fact that Israeli Defense Forces are supposed to be so strong with the Iron Dome, so on and so forth, the fact that they cannot guarantee the security of U.S. imperialist interests in that part of the world or the security of the Israeli citizens has created an existential crisis in the United States and also in the state of Israel.
Now, a couple things quickly here, and then we're going to wrap up. I have noticed in the past, like from say Thursday to today, even Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, even Friday when President Biden spoke, they're talking more about a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Okay, when early on it was we stand with Israel 100%, and they weren't really talking about Palestinians being killed or anything like that. Okay, so I think that African Americans, Congressional Black Caucus, Palestinian Americans, multiracial coalition need to put pressure on the administration. And now you got a dysfunctional House of Representatives with the coup plotters in charge of the House of Representatives, and they got to pick a speaker.
Agree among themselves.
Yeah, they had to pick a speaker. They got an idiotic Jim Jordan. Oh my God, we don't want Jim Jordan to speak in the House. Go ahead. What'd you say?
Do you know what they're fighting about? They seem to have the same ideology to me. If you find out, tell me what the issue is.
Okay, so neither one. Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise dropped out because he couldn't unify the Republican Party. You got the extreme Freedom Caucus led by Jim Jordan. You got these coup plotters, conspiracy theorists. And then it doesn't look like Jim Jordan may be able to coalesce 217 people to vote for him, Republicans to vote for him, but it's going to be hard. But no business can take place in the House of Representatives until it gets a speaker. You have a speaker pro temp, Patrick McHenry, right now, but he doesn't have any power. No bills can get passed. Okay. And this is the dysfunction among Republicans. Now, I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but sure as hell ain't stupid. I can see who consistently, overwhelmingly votes against our own interests, okay? And votes against interests of African Americans. And usually at the federal level, that's usually 9 times out of 10 is going to be Republicans. I don't agree with everything Democrats do, but generally speaking, I agree more with how they vote, generally speaking, than Republicans. One of the things that I heard, and you talked about taking hostages / prisoners of war. You refer to them as prisoners of war. The Hamas wants, from my understanding, so there's about 156 prisoners of war or hostages. Hamas, from my understanding, wants to exchange those for Palestinians who have been imprisoned in Israel. Okay. And you talked about how Palestinians are being imprisoned in Israel without a trial, without any type of due process. Talk about that for a minute, because that gets left out of the narrative. Oftentimes that's on MSNBC, unless like someone like of Arabic ancestry, like a Mehdi Hassan or Ayman Mohadeen, brings that up. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, you don't have a right to imprison somebody from another nation that's fighting for their liberation. That's common. I mean, we saw that in South Africa, in Namibia, Zimbabwe. One of their main objectives was to free their political prisoners. So even in this country,
of Hamas, one of the main objectives of Hamas is to free political prisoners, Palestinian political prisoners.
Yeah, you don't leave your fighters behind.
Okay.
And in terms of the Congress, unfortunately, only Cori Bush, who's an African American woman, congressman from St. Louis,
yes,
issued a statement alongside Rashida Tlaib, who's from the 12th district here,
in Detroit,
calling for some shift in foreign policy by the United States towards the state of Israel and Palestine. Unfortunately, people like Hakeem Jeffries keep saying that Israel is our friend. This is absurd. You know, for somebody whose ancestors came to this country in the bowels of slave ships, he should know instinctively that he should be supporting the oppressed people against the oppressors. The state of Israel is no different than the racist regime that existed in South Africa, the Jim Crow system that existed here in the United States and still exists to a large degree, because you got people now who are trying to take the right to vote away from African Americans in this country, something that had been won 60 years ago in the latest phase of it.
Right.
Actually, had been won way back in
1870, 15th Amendment
right,
for men,
then
the 19th Amendment, 1920 for women, because of Jim Crow and the rewriting of state constitutions. You know, African Americans are going to be disenfranchised, especially in the South.
Look at this case now that's going on in Alabama and Louisiana, where they don't want to redraw districts where Black people can elect their own representatives to Congress. This is still going on in 2023.
Right.
So for people like Hakeem Jeffries to be supporting Biden's policy in regard to Palestine, in regard to Ukraine, that's doing nothing to put any money in the pockets of African American people in this country, is absurd. And he needs to be called on that question, you know, because there's no benefit for Black people in this country to be supporting a right-wing Nazi-influenced regime in Ukraine, to be supporting a settler colonial racist regime in Palestine. So either they should be voted out of office, or they should change their policy, their foreign policy in particular, that supports war and that disenfranchises and disempowers Black people in this country.
Yep, they need to be called out on this. Many is not just the Congressional Black Caucus; it's both Democrats and Republicans largely.
Chuck Schumer, he's over there now.
So let me say,
unfortunately, the optics don't look good.
Right,
you know, they really don't look good at this point. Yeah.
Let me say this quickly. When we talk about Representative Hakeem Jeffries, I agree with him 9 times out of 10. He's brilliant. His uncle is one of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Okay.
Well, people like Leonard Jeffries, what is their position on Palestine?
I haven't talked to Dr. J specifically about this. Most likely he sides with the Palestinians. Just like,
I really hope so.
Yeah, just like
I really hope so.
Yeah,
because
but Dr. J is not
he needs to talk to his. I didn't know. He needs to talk to his nephew.
Yeah. Dr. J is not a politician. He's a historian. So this is the narrative coming from the U.S. government that Representative Hakeem Jeffries is echoing, and the whole, because I saw members of the Congressional Black Caucus stating the position of the U.S. government as if it's their position, things like this. And I'm like, no, that doesn't, no. Israel is treating the Gazans, or the people, or the Palestinians, the people of Gaza, they're treating them the same way this country treated African Americans during segregation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And still treat them that
it's like colonialism. So it's like, why the hell are you supporting something like that? They said, no, you have to be bold enough to stand on principles. And now I think it's important for us to say, okay, we respect humanity, and we're not saying that one person's life is more of that, or one group's life. I'm not saying the lives of Palestinians is more important than the lives of Israelis, or vice versa. Okay,
or vice versa, right? I agree.
And what I saw early on from a lot of people in mainstream media, especially cable news, is just highlighting the killing of Israelis, and they were almost silent on Palestinians being killed for decades.
I know, and they do the same thing here.
Yes.
Look how many Black people get killed every day in the streets of the United States, but let a white person get killed, and it's always more important. You know, that we get killed by the police, we get killed by each other because of psychological issues, mental health issues, economic issues. But it's not a major crisis until a white police officer is killed, or some other white official or ruling class white person is killed. Then it becomes a major issue. So, you know, we have to reorient our thinking in that regard.
And we have to hold these elected officials accountable, and
definitely,
and both Republicans and Democrats. Okay.
Yes.
I just want to read this headline here in just a second, maybe have you comment on this, and I want you to tell people how they can read the Pan-African Newswire and how they can financially support the Pan-African Newswire, because I know all that research don't happen for free. Okay. and you know, you and I, we don't do this for the money, but it sure as hell takes money to do this. Okay. So when we look at so we talked about colonialism, we talked about the mistreatment of the Palestinians. If we look at this article here, this came out October 12th, Washington Post. Israel says it will end Hamas rule in Gaza as casualties soar. This was another big article. Israel's army said Thursday that it would seek the end of Hamas in Gaza as airstrikes on the besieged enclave targeted the group's senior leaders and caused widespread civilian casualties. The intensifying conflict with Hamas comes as a shaken Israel wrestles with the aftermath of an attack that saw the group's militants stalking civilians and soldiers throughout Israeli border communities Saturday. So that was going back Saturday, October 7th, killing more than 1,000 and kidnapping scores more in one of the deadliest attacks in Israeli history. The unprecedented incursion has left the region reeling, upending a years-long stalemate between Israel and Hamas, which effectively rules the Gaza Strip and its population of more than 2 million civilians. It's 2.2 million. I'm going to show a map here of the Gaza Strip of Gaza in just a minute.
Very small strip of land.
Say it again.
It's a very small strip of land. It's considered the largest and most dense open-air prison in the world.
Open-air prison, and exactly.
Israeli, right.
Yep. Israeli leaders are foreshadowing a ground invasion aimed at permanently changing the status quo, in marked contrast with past incursions that left Hamas in place. Okay, so go ahead and comment on this. Everybody read these articles as well. Go ahead and comment on this, and then let people know how they can read the Pan-African Newswire and how they can financially support the research and what you do.
Briefly, they've been talking about going in on the ground now for over 8 days, and they haven't done it. They're bombing from the air, which is cowardly. They're bombing schools, convoys. After they tell people to evacuate the area, then they turn around and drop bombs on those people. They've even hit hospitals inside of Gaza Strip, which is a total violation of international law. And the United States government has not criticized them, whether it's people like Hakeem Jeffries, people like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. They're all culpable in committing these type of war crimes.
Republicans also.
Let them go in.
Republicans as well. So I think it's important for us to hold elected officials accountable regardless of political party. Go ahead.
Exactly. Both of them support the Zionist project in West Asia. So I think this is really going to expose a lot of people. And it has exposed the weakness of the state of Israel as well as the United States foreign policy in West Asia. And it's really amazing that this is taking place while the only response that we're hearing from the White House is that Israel unconditional support. No matter how many war crimes they commit, they're killing children, they're bombing areas where there are sick people, senior citizens, United Nations protected zones that support the people in the Gaza Strip are being bombed using U.S. weapons by the Israeli Defense Forces. This is a scandal that's going on right now.
Exactly.
So, but anyway, people can reach us.
Go ahead.
Logging on to the Pan-African Newswire, and that's panafricannews.blogspot.com, panafricannews.blogspot.com. And also, I'm on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. So they can check out the work that I'm doing, and
the articles
they
you
can reach
write.
out as well.
panafricannews.blogspot.com. We have the
website
here, and now can people contribute financially to the research you do and things like this in the operation of the organization? Can they support through the website? Or how can they support? Let me put it like that.
No. This is the work. They can support by reading, and they can support by doing research and sharing also the social media post, the web post, so other people can read this information. I mean, it's amazing. Last month was like the highest number of views that the Pan-African Newswire received in its 15-year, more than 15, actually, it's almost 18-year history. So it is growing. The viewership is growing, and also frequently I get invited, to radio stations and TV stations like yours.
Yes.
Whether it's Press TV, whether it's Sputnik Radio out of Washington D.C., WPFW in Washington D.C., which is a part of Pacifica Radio, and others. Webinars.
Have you been on Al Jazeera also? Al Jazeera TV?
Yeah, I have been on there in the past. Not as frequently now. Yeah. But I've been on Al Jazeera, RT, TVC, which is based in Nigeria, and others.
Right. Now, just so people can understand this geographically, okay, this is courtesy MSNBC, whether they know it or not. Gaza evacuation area. So we see Gaza Strip, and so it's about 140 square miles or so, 144, 2.2 million people densely packed into that area. You see is right next to Egypt.
Right.
Okay. Egypt is in North Africa. All right.
Exactly.
So these, I mean, all that was Africa before the Suez Canal.
The imperialists drew those lines.
Well, the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, 14 European nations, they meet in Berlin, Germany, and they carve up Africa into colonies. And most of the geographical boundaries that exist in Africa today came from that Berlin Conference. There was no African representation there. But I want people to see this geographically. And for those who are confused, Egypt is still in Africa. Just so who think Egypt is part of this fictitious Middle East or something like that. No, Egypt is part of Africa. Okay.
Of course.
All right.
Goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Various civilizations, languages, all that. So that's our land. So we should definitely be, and even if you say Palestine is not part of Africa, they're still neighbors, and we should be concerned about what's going on in our neighbors' communities.
Absolutely, and everybody also now with us. I mean, it costs money to operate the African History Network. I'm broadcasting right now. I'm not broadcasting directly through Facebook. I'm broadcasting through Restream and YouTube. That costs $179 a month, the package that I have that I'm using to broadcast right now and do rebroadcast for this network. Okay. So you can support us, $, the AHN show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, you can register for my online courses. I'll tell you about in just a minute when we get finished here with Abayomi. Well, look, brother, keep up the good work. You share some valuable information with us, and the lives of people of different ethnic groups, religions, races, everybody's life is equal. Okay. So we can't and this is one of the big criticisms I've had of the media going back to October 7th, where they just want to talk about Israelis who were killed.
Right.
And even I heard one Jewish reporter, even today, he said, well, when you look at, 1,400 Israelis killed, there's 10 million people in Israel. He said, proportionally, that's the largest killing of Israelis or Jews since the Holocaust. Okay, but wait a second. Yes, that's a tragedy for those who were innocent to be killed. But wait a second. You've had over 2,400 Palestinians killed, and it's 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza. Okay, so that's a greater proportion.
Exactly.
Why isn't that emphasized in the media? That's a greater proportion.
Occurred in Europe. It did not occur in Palestine.
Yeah.
It was in Germany, Poland, Hungary. That's where those millions and millions of Jews were killed between 1933 and 1945. So why put a state in the middle of millions and millions of dark-skinned people as opposed to putting it in Germany, Hungary, and Poland? Because they didn't want a lot of European Jews in the United States and in Western Europe after World War II. That is the reality of the situation.
And
they have told
the
Jewish people that Israel is some type of homeland or haven for the Jewish people, when in fact it's turning out to be another death trap for the Jewish people. Jews themselves, the Jewish people themselves, are starting to criticize their leadership. And that's very, very important.
Yes.
Because they cannot guarantee their security. And they could, right now, the Palestinians have a psychological upper hand in this conflict, even though they're dying every day. But more and more people are sympathizing with the Palestinians as opposed to the Israelis. The Israelis themselves should look at that.
Yeah. And lastly, so the creation of Israel in 1948, the 3 years after World War II ends in 1945, it was to give the Jews some land after 6 million of them were killed during World War II. Okay.
But they weren't killed in Asia. They were killed in Europe.
Yeah, they were killed in Europe. Yeah. So you're saying
Palestine.
So you're saying Israel should be in Europe, not next to
Possibly,
Egypt.
I don't know.
Which was Africa.
That's up to the Europeans to decide.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep. Exactly.
That's up to them to decide. But you know, they cannot continue. Even the Israeli citizens themselves had a wake-up call last week because they were calling in the Israeli Defense Forces, the police, all these security agencies, and they were nowhere to be found.
Yes. So, yes, that's the other. When the attack happened on the music festival, they had the Israelis had to fend for themselves.
Exactly.
And this is one of the other criticisms against Benjamin Netanyahu. Some say you were so busy trying to stay out of prison that you weren't protecting the people. Okay. Sounds like Donald Trump.
And they're fighting each other.
What'd you say?
Huge divisions. There are huge divisions in Israeli society. We've seen it over the last year.
Yes.
Demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people against the Netanyahu right-wing government. So you cannot fight an outside force if your house is divided. You know, if the parents are fighting each other, if the children are fighting each other, anybody can walk in and take over your house. It may even collapse because of the divisions. So this is what they need to look at themselves, rather than looking outside at Hamas and Iran, Hezbollah and Lebanon and so forth. They need to look internally and try to figure out how to move forward as Israelis in this new political situation.
All right. Well, look, Abayomi, it's always great talking to you, man. Sorry we kept you so long. We're going to let you go, man. Okay.
No problem.
And we'll bring you back soon. Okay. Everybody, please support PanAfricanNewsWire.blogspot.com. Take care, Abayomi. Have a good day.
Okay. You take care as well.
All right. Peace.
All right.
All right, everybody. That was Abayomi Azikiwe of the Pan African Newswire. Visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I got another article I'm going to show you quickly here. Visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register for the online history courses that I teach. We have some great information for you. This also helps to support the African History Network, helps to support the research that I do, helps us stay on the air, keep paying the bills, etc. Okay. Listen to the African History Network show Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We broadcast on our social media platforms. 9:10 a.m. Superstation I was on for 7 years. They did a format switch. They're now conservative talk radio. So they got rid of all their hosts. Fine with me, because I got more followers on social media than they did. On Saturdays, I teach ancient Kemet, one of the regional names for Egypt, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is originally it was a 12-week online course. This time around that I'm teaching this about 20 weeks. So I'm saying this is a 12 module online course, okay? Because some of these just like this past Saturday, Saturday, October 14th, we did 3 hours. Okay. Now we do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you still have full access. You can go back, watch the entire course. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. The class is on sale, 54% off. It's regularly $130. It's on sale, $60. As soon as you register, you can start watching content. We had a great class. Yesterday, we dealt with the decline of Moorish power in Spain, why the Moors lost power. We talked about the Knights Templar, and how we dealt with Freemasonry as well. We dealt with a number of topics. We got into Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, slavery and the rise of European capitalism by Dr. John Henrik Clarke. All of that. Okay. On Sundays, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian and U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Okay, now, created both of these classes. I'm a historian that studied history 30 years, a little more than 30 years now. And the first class, I've been teaching that since 2017 on and off. Okay. There's 15 books that we use in the class. Now, you don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in the class. Okay. But there's 15 books that we use. There's 80 to 100 articles that we reference. And what I found was that this period of time from 1800 to 1968, 1970 is crucial to understanding what's taking place right now today. So I had to create a second class to focus in on that period of time, that was approximately 170-year period of time, so we could look at that history year by year chronologically. So with the Haitian Revolution and the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, because those two events are related, and we go through and we look and see what leads up to the Civil War taking place. We look at the Compromise of 1820, the Texas Revolution, 1836, Mexican-American War, 1846, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, where the U.S. gets the territory that makes up California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada from Mexico to get that for $15 million. We look at the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, the Compromise of 1850, which consisted of 5 bills to organize the land that the U.S. gets from Mexico. That 5th bill, which made up the Compromise of 1850, was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which went farther than the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. We deal with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which dealt with allowing slavery in Western states, dealing with Western expansion in the Kansas and Nebraska territories. We deal with Bleeding Kansas, which was armed conflict in 1855, 1856, between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups in the Kansas territory. We deal with the election of Abraham Lincoln as a candidate for the Republican Party as a direct backlash to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Republican Party is going to be founded in 1854. We do with the Civil War, 1861, 1865, Reconstruction era, 1865, 1877, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which is what the 13th Amendment is based upon. We talk about the Freedmen's Bank being created, the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands, 1865, the collapse of Reconstruction, 1877, with the Compromise of 1877, the deal made between Republicans and Democrats for if Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the Republican candidate, if Democrats allow him to become president, because neither Rutherford B. Hayes nor Samuel J. Tilden had enough. Well, hold on, we got something playing. I gotta see what this is playing. Okay, neither Rutherford B. Hayes nor Samuel J. Tilden had enough electoral college votes to become president-elect. And hold on, there's some video playing. Just okay, let's continue. So the Civil War, Reconstruction era, and the deal that was made between Republicans and Democrats to allow Rutherford B. Hayes to become president if he agreed to remove the Union troops from the South, which were protecting to a certain extent the new rights that African Americans received, okay, from the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, but also the Civil Rights Act of 1866 as well. So we deal with this history and we go through this history chronologically up until 1968 with the assassination of Dr. King. All right. So that next class for our Sunday class is going to be Sunday, October 22nd, Sunday, October 22nd. So register for both of those classes, and we have a bundle pack where you get both classes for $100. Also, we have a 15 of my lectures in the bundle pack. African History Awakens the African Mind from Mental Death. We have this in a digital download bundle pack, 15 of my lectures, and the lectures are listed here as well. We have it on the homepage of our website, and we have a description here, 15 of my lectures dealing with history, politics, the film Black Panther, entrepreneurship. This is on sale, $75. It's a $150 value. We have it in digital download format and DVD format. DVD format is $100. So you can order that right now and start watching the content right now for that, okay? Lastly, this article here is from, there's an article from history.com, which deals with the creation of the state of Israel. Now, this is not the Israel of the Bible. And it's important. Now, what I say may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Maybe I should have started the broadcast with that, my disclaimer. I may say some things that are outside the circumference of your own awareness just because you disagree with them or think they're not true. Does not mean that they're not true. Just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. Okay. So history.com, official website of the History Channel, May 14th, 1948. May 14th, 1948, State of Israel proclaimed. Now, this is not the Israel of the Bible, and we have to make a clear distinction between world history and religious literature. World history is in world history books. Religious literature is in religious literature books. If you go to a historical museum, especially a historical museum that deals with world history and different cultures, different periods of time, ancient history. Generally speaking, do you realize that you usually don't see biblical characters in world history museums? There's a reason why. unless they have a special section in the World History Museum for biblical characters. Generally speaking, you don't see biblical characters in world history museums. On May 14th, 1948, in Tel Aviv, Jewish Agency Chairman David Ben-Gurion proclaims the State of Israel, establishing the first Jewish state in 2,000 years, establishing the first Jewish state in 2,000 years. Ben-Gurion became Israel's first premier. Now, in the distance, the rumble of guns could be heard from fighting that broke between Jews and Arabs immediately following the British Army withdrawal earlier that day. Egypt launched an air assault against Israel that evening. Egypt launched an air assault against Israel that evening. Despite a blackout in Tel Aviv and the expected Arab invasion, Jews celebrated the birth of their new nation, especially after word was received that the United States had recognized the Jewish state, especially after word was received that the United States had recognized the Jewish state. At midnight, the state of Israel officially came into being upon termination of the British mandate in Palestine. Modern Israel has its origins in the Zionism movement, established in the late 19th century by Jews in the Russian Empire who called for the establishment of a territorial Jewish state after enduring persecution. So this is what Abayomi Azikiwe, editor of the Pan-African Newswire, was explaining this background history. Modern Israel has its origins in the Zionism movement, established in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, by Jews in the Russian Empire who called for the establishment of a territorial Jewish state after enduring persecution. In 1896, Jewish Austrian journalist Theodor Herzl, Herzl, published an influential political pamphlet called The Jewish State, which argued that the establishment of a Jewish state was the only way of protecting Jews from anti-Semitism. Okay? The political pamphlet, The Jewish State, argued that the establishment of a Jewish state was the only way of protecting Jews from anti-Semitism. Theodor Herzl became the leader of what's known as Zionism, convening the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland in 1897. Now, Ottoman-controlled Palestine, the original home of the Jews, was chosen as the most desirable location for a Jewish state, and Theodor Herzl unsuccessfully petitioned the Ottoman government for a charter. Now, as Abayomi Azikiwe was saying, the Holocaust, which took place during World War II and before World War II, so 1933 to 1945, the Holocaust did not take place in the area where Israel is and Palestine. It took place in Europe. It took place in France. It took place in Germany, took place in Poland, etc. Ottoman-controlled Palestine, the original home of the Jews, was chosen as the most desirable location for a Jewish state, and Herzl unsuccessfully petitioned the Ottoman government for a charter. Now, one of the places they were looking at to set up the state of Israel was Uganda, okay? Because they thought that Uganda was in the area that was the real life Garden of Eden spoken about in the Bible. Think how African Americans' consciousness would have been elevated if they thought that Africa was the Holy Land and not Israel. Okay, let's continue. And I'm trying to pull up something. Okay, I'm trying to pull up a citation on that too. All right, now, after the failed Russian Revolution in 1905, growing numbers of Eastern European and Russian Jews began to emigrate to Palestine, joining the few thousand Jews who had arrived earlier. Give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a heart on this broadcast. You're watching a special edition of the African History Network show as we deal with the Israel-Hamas war, humanitarian crisis, deadly Middle East conflict. And our guest tonight was Abayomi Azikiwe, editor of the Pan-African Newswire. After the failed Russian Revolution of 1905, growing numbers of Eastern European and Russian Jews began to migrate to Palestine, joining the few thousand Jews who had arrived earlier. The Jewish settlers insisted on the use of Hebrew as their spoken language. With the collapse of the Ottoman Empire during World War I, now World War I is 1914 and 1918. We deal with a lot of this in the second class that I teach, the class I teach on Sundays, Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968, because we deal with World War I. We deal with World War II. We deal with the Red Summer 1919, where you had about 25 major race riots the year after World War I ends. With the collapse of the Ottoman Empire during World War I, Britain took over Palestine. In 1917, okay, now this is still during World War I. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, B-A-L-F-O-U-R, the Balfour Declaration, which declared its intent to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Although protested by the Arab states, the Balfour Declaration was included in the British Mandate over Palestine, which was authorized by the League of Nations in 1922. You see how all this deals with understanding history and geopolitics. Because of Arab opposition to the establishment of any Jewish state in Palestine, British rule continued throughout the 1920s and 30s. So we see European colonialism that is embedded into the setup of the state of Israel and where it is and all of this. We see all of this connected. And we see this continued conflict between Jews and Arabs. Beginning in 1929, so the same year the stock market crash here in the U.S., which leads to the Great Depression. Beginning in 1929, Arabs and Jews openly fought in Palestine, and Britain attempted to limit Jewish immigration as a means of appeasing the Arabs. As a result of the Holocaust in Europe, many Jews illegally entered Palestine during World War II. Jewish groups employed terrorism against British forces in Palestine, which they thought had betrayed the Zionist cause. Okay. Now, I don't know if those Jewish groups today are, when they look at that history retrospectively, I don't know if they're looked at retrospectively as terrorists or freedom fighters. I don't know. Jewish groups employed terrorism against British forces in Palestine, which they thought had betrayed the Zionist cause. At the end of World War II in 1945, the United States took up the Zionist cause. Britain, unable to find a practical solution, referred the problem to the United Nations, which in November 1947 voted to partition Palestine. The Jews were to possess more than half of Palestine. The Jews were to possess more than half of Palestine, although they made up less than half of Palestine's population. The Palestinian Arabs, aided by volunteers from other countries, fought the Zionist forces. But by May 14th, 1948, 3 years after World War II ends, the Jews had secured full control of their United Nations allocated share of Palestine and also some Arab territory. On May 14th, 1948, Britain withdrew with the expiration of its mandate, and the state of Israel was proclaimed. The next day, forces from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded. They've been fighting for really going back thousands of years. These people have been fighting with the Arabs are AD people, so you go back about 6th century, something like 6th century AD, something like that. They've been fighting over 1,500 years, okay? And they continue to fight today. On May 14th, Britain withdrew with the expiration of its mandate, and the state of Israel was proclaimed. The next day, forces from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded. The Israelis, though less equipped, managed to fight off the Arabs and then seize key territories such as Galilee, the Palestinian coast, and a strip of territory connecting the coastal region to the western section of Jerusalem. In 1949, the United Nations brokered ceasefires, left the state of Israel in permanent control of this conquered territory. The departure of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs from Israel during the war left the country with a substantial Jewish majority. During the Third Arab-Israeli conflict, known as the Six-Day War of 1967, which Abayomi spoke of as well, Israel again greatly increased its borders, capturing from Jordan, Egypt, and Syria the old city of Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. In 1979, Israel and Egypt signed a historic peace agreement in which Israel returned the Sinai the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for Egyptian recognition and peace. Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, signed a major peace accord in 1993, which envisioned the gradual implementation of Palestinian self-government in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Israeli-Palestinian peace process moved slowly.
It's the only Jewish nation in the world.
Process moved slowly However, and throughout the 21st century, major fighting between Israelis and Palestinians has resumed in Israel and the occupied territories. Okay, and they continue to fight today. They continue to fight today. This is a little background history. Now, your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. Check this out. This day in history, May 14th, 1940, State of Israel proclaimed. And we see the role that the United States and Britain plays, okay, these Western powers in setting up the State of Israel. All right, check this out at history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. So this ain't conspiracy theorist. This is not a conspiracy theorist website or anything like this. This is the History Channel telling you this. There was an article from Reuters, and I'm going to pull this up. How's everybody doing? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. Look at the area once again of the world that we're talking about. This is right next to Africa. Okay. And okay, that's Al Jazeera's website. I mean, Al Jazeera's fake page right here. So look at what we were just talking about. Here we see Egypt toward the bottom of the screen. Egypt's in North Africa, still in Africa. Okay. Was conquered by Arabs in 642 AD, is still in Africa. And there's still black Africans who live in southern Egypt. We see Gaza Strip. Okay. We see all that area that's Palestine right now. Then we see Israel. Okay. We see Israel right next to Gaza and the Gaza Strip, and Israel right next to Egypt. There was a article from Reuters that has been talked about in the past few days, and it deals with and we're going to post this also on my Facebook page so you can see this. Negotiations were taking place between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, if I remember correctly. Saudi Arabia puts Israel deal on ice amid war, engages with Iran. So we see all this conflict in this area of the world. Okay. Let's go to this here. Let's look at this. Read this article from Reuters.com. And a lot of people are saying that, okay, now a lot of experts are saying, so now this conflict here, this Israel-Hamas war is going to disrupt these negotiations. Saudi Arabia puts deal on ice amid war, engages with Iran, sources say. The conflict has also pushed the kingdom to engage with Iran. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman took his first phone call from Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi as Riyadh tries to prevent a broader surge in violence across the region. Okay, so this is a piece from Reuters, and I'll tell you the date of it as well. Okay, Saudi Arabia puts Israel deal on ice. Al Jazeera also, I think Al Jazeera picked this up from Al Jazeera probably picked this up from Reuters. But if we look at this here from Al Jazeera, all right, now let's see here. Okay, Saudi Arabia puts Israel deal on ice amid war engages with Iran. Report: the Saudi crown prince and Iranian president had to. Okay. Saudi Arabia is putting United States-backed plans to normalize ties with Israel on ice. Two sources familiar with Riyadh's thinking told Reuters news agency, signaling a rapid rethink, a rapid rethink of its foreign policy priorities as war escalates between Israel and Palestinian group Hamas. The conflict has also pushed the kingdom to engage with Iran. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman took his first phone call from Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi as Riyadh tries to prevent a broader surge in violence across the region. The two sources told Reuters there would be a delay in the U.S.-backed talks on normalization with Israel, which was a key step for the kingdom to secure what Riyadh considers the real prize of a U.S. defense pact in exchange, until Iran-backed Hamas sparked a war on October 7th by launching a devastating attack on Israel. Until Iran-backed Hamas sparked a war on October 7th by launching a devastating attack on Israel, both Israeli and Saudi leaders had been saying they were moving steadily towards a deal that could have reshaped the Middle East. So many experts on the Middle East and Middle East politics think that part of the motivation for this October 7th attack was to disrupt these talks that were taking place between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Okay. Both Israeli and Saudi leaders had been saying they were moving steadily towards a deal that could have reshaped the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, and home of its two holiest sites, had until the latest conflict indicated it would not allow its pursuit of a U.S. defense pact to be derailed, even if Israel did not offer significant concessions to the Palestinians in their bid for statehood, sources had previously said. But an approach that sidelined Palestinians would risk angering Arabs. Okay, but an approach that sidelined Palestinians, and the majority of the Palestinians are Arabs, but an approach that sidelined Palestinians would risk angering Arabs around the region, as Arab news outlets broadcast images of Palestinians killed in Israeli retaliatory airstrikes. Hamas fighters killed more than 1,300 Israelis in their October 7th attack, and more than 1,952 Palestinians have been killed by Friday in Israel's continuing strikes on Gaza in response. Okay, Friday, October 13th. Check out the rest of this piece here. Okay, because this deals with different countries in this area of the world and politics between these different countries. And it all comes down to a fight over land. Saudi Arabia puts Israel deal on ice amid war, engages with Iran. This is from Al Jazeera, picked up from Reuters.com, October 14th, Saturday, October 14th, 2023. Okay, so check this out as well. All right, if you like this type of information, if you learned anything today, please support the African History Network. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, help finance the research, pay for all these services that I use to keep us going. $ the AHN show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. And we have the links right on the homepage of the website as well, right here when you scroll down past the information for the classes. And the classes that I teach, they're on 2 digital platforms. I have to pay for those digital platforms each month. Even if I don't teach a class, I still have to pay for those digital platforms to keep everything online and in existence. When you click right here on our Cash App link, it shows you the QR code. So this is our Cash App tag, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it say Michael. These 2 here and others are fake African History Network Cash App accounts. Ours is $ the AHN show, SHOW. That's our Cash App tag. There's about 5 fake African History Network Cash App accounts I've identified. So they're using variations of our tag. See, our tag here is $ the AHN show, SHOW. So I'm still trying to get those shut down. Here's our PayPal tag, and then also register for the online classes that I teach as well. All right, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time. Peace.